Alright, so I wanted to show the difference between 6L6 power tubes and EL34 power tubes in my Mesa 290. It's a tube power amp made by Mesa Boogie. Hopefully what this video shows is the subtle differences in the sound. The 6L6, if you notice, has kind of this scooped mid-range thing going on, and it's kind of got a scratchy high end. It also has an increased low end on the 6L6. And the EL34s seem to have less of a pronounced low end and more of a smooth mid-range, which, you know, I'll explain why that's important in a second. But basically, in this video, you'll hear, you know, little sections of each set of tubes. I recorded them both back to back, just swapped out the tubes, and then I just pieced it together in the song, so you can kind of hear them, hopefully back to back, in a way that maybe lets you hear it a little better, rather than trying to distinguish one track from another track, like the length of a whole song. So I was hoping that you would be able to see the difference on here. I've got a frequency analyzer for both of the guitar tracks. It wasn't as pronounced visually as it was in terms of audio. Like, to my ears it was pronounced. On here, I'll show you. So that's the 6L6, which, you know, and then the EL34 is here. So it doesn't show a whole lot of difference. I was expecting to see a big scoop, so whatever. So why is the EL34 my favorite? I've had these 6L6s in here for several years now. Just never thought of changing them. I read on a forum that you could change them, because the amp is a fixed bias, which normally means you don't change the tubes. Okay, so why did I do that, and why do I prefer that? If you're a studio engineer and you're trying to make all the instruments fit to come out of speakers and earbuds and things like that, you want your instruments to take up their own frequency space. The 6L6s have a very pronounced low-end bass frequency response. And as guitar players, oftentimes they market to us, a set of pickups or an amp, and they'll say has crushing lows or a thunderous low end from this cab or whatever. That is garbage once you get in the studio, because all that gets chopped out. That is the territory of the bass guitar, and if you have a really heavy low end on the guitar and you've got a bass track going at the same time, the guitar is basically gonna turn to mud. So once you put it in the studio, that means that all that thunderous and crushing low end gets cut right out like a razor. It just isn't usable, because that's space that belongs to your kick drum and your bass guitar. So you're trying to put, this thunderous low end on a guitar, which it never was meant to have. So, brings me to the EL34. It takes less work to fit in a EL34 tube. Speaking of like using it in a EQ sort of sense. A guitar is a mid-range instrument. So if you've got a pronounced smooth mid-range and it's not scratchy sounding, then it's going to fit right in, and it's not going to overlap, and it didn't have all that really, really heavy low end, but it had a powerful low mid kind of punch to it, but it didn't have this crushing low end. It did need to get cut out. So it just sits better in the mix. Plus, I don't know, once you kind of figure out your tone, especially if you're playing heavier stuff like this, you kind of learn, I don't know, like you want to get more kind of snarl and bite out of an amp rather than lows and punch. And the EL34s, I really feel like give you a good bit of snarl, and that's just another kind of upper mid word that sometimes they'll use, a snarl and bite. Bite being the high range, the snarl being upper mids. And in a full band mix, that just works better. It's easier. That being said, okay, these tracks, there's zero EQ on either track other than just rolling off anything below 80 hertz. Actually, I rolled off 80 hertz too, just because it's bass guitar, it's not needed. That being said, after rolling off to 80 hertz, let's see if we can see it here. When we get to the really heavy palm mutes, you can see that's a pretty fat waveform here. Hold on, I'll let you see it here. Hear that? That's a lot of low end. And then similarly, playing that same riff, here's the EL34s, you just don't have that ridiculously fat riff here, or waveform, excuse me. And it still sounds good. It's still punchy, it still cuts through. It just doesn't have that speaker shaking, chung, 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 which is really just going to fight with your bass guitar anyway. So I would say you can hear it the most on a high gain sound. On the cleans, it's fairly, honestly, if I have my eyes closed on clean, I don't think I'd be able to pick it out, because they sound close. I mean, there is more mids on the EL34. Whoops, get out the distortion track on that. So it's very full. That's the EL34, 6L6. It's just, from what I can tell, the EL34 just has it's got a little bit more real estate in a mid-range territory. like I say, it's subtle, but it's there. And really, at the end of the day, it's one person's preference over another. There's still going to be guitar players who are like, oh yeah, I use this to get my crushing low end, and they're going to be the bane of the existence of any studio engineer person trying to make their ridiculously fat tone work in a live band situation. Similarly, any sound guy in the front of house is going to be sitting there, shaking his head at how much low end information he's got, and he's going to go on that board and he's going to turn down the lows because he can't use it. But that being said, if you're just jamming by yourself, yeah, roll up the lows, crank it up. Anyway, hope you guys liked the demo here. I did it on the Mesa 290 just because, frankly, I was one of those people wanting to know the difference in the sound. So here, I'll show you the 290 here. All right, there she is. Oh yeah, and there's the line 6 that I run as a preamp. So digital preamp into tube power amp into a 412 cab that I mic'd. I mic'd stereo. I learned a couple tricks from SMG Studios on that, so props to them. Alright, if you guys stuck around this long, cheers, thanks. Go ahead and like and subscribe. I'll try and do more demos. Should have a new guitar coming along the way that I sold a bunch of crap to get, so we shall see. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Love you guys. Peace.